If you're coming here thinking that it's going to be like your previous country and you're going to complain about what's different, then it's not going to work out well for you.
Meet Adam, an American who's been visiting the Philippines for 7 years in a row and is now settled here with his Filipino wife. But as a digital nomad, he has traveled to almost every country in Southeast Asia. Adam told me about the dating culture in the Philippines, how to make friends with locals, and why Filipinos don't like to move out from their parents. I'm Max Chernov. Tarana.
I've been fortunate to travel through a lot of Southeast Asia, and what's great about the Philippines, although it's like very, very different from America, there's also this like Western influence that makes it really familiar. The Philippines feels the right amount of like different but the same, I feel.
Yeah, because people speak English.
Yes, exactly.
And like, that's a huge influence of American culture.
Totally.
Like, totally, yeah.
It's funny that like, you know, in American schools, I feel like we didn't learn as much as we should have about how connected the Philippines and America is. Like just, you know, early on, you know, from the 1900s to like World War II. But yeah, there's such a huge influence that America had that makes it, I think, a little easier to kind of just in general become familiar with the culture.
Speaking about American influence, even the streets is like 36, 37, 38.
Exactly.
It's like, wow, interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I would say here, this could feel like any big city in America. I feel like maybe you go 5 to 10 kilometers outside of like the downtown area. That's where you start to see, for lack of a better word, like less modern development. Maybe the housing structures look, you know, more like what you'd think of like, you know, not like a city, like maybe more like I guess province, you know, like DIY housing, I guess is maybe a better way to put it. But yeah, this feels very modern, and I think that's why, you know, a lot of expats like myself like to hang out with something like this.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think I was just surprised at the grasp of the English language that the typical Filipino has. It makes it really easy, especially at least in Manila, that, you know, although I've been learning Tagalog, I really don't need to use it that often unless I like leave the city.
What's your level of Tagalog?
I would say in between beginner and intermediate. I'm pretty good at just asking questions and getting like, you know, basic answers, but it's hard to have like a really in-depth conversation. But it's fun. I mean, I surprise almost everyone. Every time I order something, I do it in Tagalog, and they always seem really surprised.
Can you say anything?
Marunong ako kanti lang Tagalog, pero hindi ko masyadong nakakaintindi lahat. And so I just said I can speak a little Tagalog, I just can't understand everyone. I guess some words for you, like maraming salamat po means like thank you very much, or like ma'am or sir, or say, you know, you want to say like you're welcome, like you could say walang anuman. I feel like all of the kind of surface level conversation I'm really good at. It's more so I have to be careful, because if I say something that makes them think I'm too good at Tagalog, then they like speak really quickly and say all these things I don't understand. So.
Right.
But it's been fun. I mean, you really don't need to learn it here to be able to get around as a tourist, but I feel like I really want to, you know, I'm choosing to live here, so I want to at least make the effort to be able to understand everyone, because a little bit of Tagalog goes a long way. I feel like even when I was asking where to park nearby, you know, I rolled my window down and I asked the security guard in Tagalog, and his face went from like to like a smile, because, you know, I'm speaking his language to him.
Yeah.
So little things like that I think go a long way.
And I guess this is not very typical and probably appreciated from the local community. I'm pretty sure most of the foreigners, Americans as well, they don't even try to learn the language, right?
Totally. And, you know, it is a little complicated, and I think, you know, most Americans really aren't exposed to any Tagalog unless it's the Spanish words that also carry over. But, you know, even like, you know, my family, my wife's family, like my in-laws, they're fluent in English. So there's really, you know, I have to kind of put a lot of effort into learning it and then like speaking it with them, because, you know, on a daily basis, I don't really need to speak Tagalog. But I hate when I'm hanging out with a group of friends or trying to meet new people, and then, you know, I can't, you know, I feel like they have to cater to me. I just don't really like that feeling.
Can you, I don't know if you can compare experience like having a Filipino girlfriend versus the American girlfriend?
Yeah. No, I feel like maybe it's because my wife had worked in Singapore for a while, and she in general is just maybe her family too is just more exposed to Western culture. There hasn't been much difference from the different like girlfriends from either. I would say, and it could just be where I grew up in America. In Asia, I feel like girls sometimes, like for example, if there's like a spider that's nearby, I'm not afraid of spiders, but like I don't necessarily, want to touch them, but she'll just like pick it up and like put it somewhere else. Or like getting on a motorcycle or do some of the other things that I think are maybe in Western culture less like girly, I feel like is, what I've experienced, and I'm not saying it's every girl here, but like some of the things that are maybe quote unquote feminine or girly or what girls are supposed to do in Western culture don't really apply here as much. So I find that kind of interesting.
Can you give an example?
I mean, I would say, I don't know a single girl in America that rides a motorcycle. And here it's just like, that's just very, very common. I would say outside of that, it could just be that my friend group is a little more, I guess, exposed to Western culture. But I personally, maybe I'm lucky, I haven't experienced like a huge shift. We have the same sense of humor, we have like the same music, stuff like that. But I'm sure there are some pretty big differences. Specifically, my wife and I are also only like a year apart in age. She's only a year younger than me. I'm sure that might also play a part because we're from the same generation, grew up on the internet, like love technology. So for us, we have a lot more in common than, we have than maybe some other couples.
How's the dating culture? I lived in the US for total maybe like 7-8 months.
Oh, nice.
So, and I was in completely different places, like one is state of Maine and one is San Francisco.
Oh, nice. So the two coasts. That's great.
Yeah, they're very opposite. What I saw, what I experienced, younger generation, they're very exposed to dating. So people actually date.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of normal thing. When you're like 16, 17, you like start dating. In some countries here in the region, it's kind of not expected that you date, especially before the marriage. How's it in the Philippines for this matter?
Yeah, it seems not too different from American culture, at least from my perspective. Although I'm sure in the province area, things are a little bit different just because I think you're maybe the expectations of starting a family and, there's maybe just less prospects for your relationship in general. So maybe that moves a little quicker. But it seems like there's a lot of similarities. Like in America right now, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but people are waiting longer to get married and have kids. And maybe that's a symptom of like just society in general or the economics or a variety of factors. And I feel like that same thing, there's a trend of that in the Philippines too. I feel like for my parents' age, you're expected to get married and have kids when you're like 20 years old. And although I'm sure that's still ingrained in some expectations from parents here, I think it's a lot more common for people to try to figure themselves out, figure out what they want to do with their career, and then wait a little bit to have kids. So that's, I guess, another perk of the Philippines. I feel like, at least in some of the modern areas, it's not, we have similar dating habits or I guess expectations of like, maybe in your 20s, not doing exactly what your parents did, One of the things that I feel like I've really liked about Filipino culture is that there's not this pressure to essentially move, get out, go on your own, maybe start incurring some debt. Like there's a little bit more, I guess, like understanding of like, hey, you can stay at home for longer. Yeah. Now, I think that could also be a detriment to some people because I think one of the perks of moving out when you're younger is you have to kind of mature, grow up, become more financially responsible. But a lot of people in America end up going into debt and then not necessarily being a good thing. But I would say, in America, the idea of staying with your in-laws is kind of like this, people aren't really excited to do it. It's not really an appealing thing. But, when we stay with my wife's family, maybe we're lucky because the house is big enough to accommodate us all. Yeah. There's, bathrooms that are like, there's enough bathrooms and space that it doesn't feel cramped. Yeah. But, it's been kind of refreshing that I get to I guess be a part of a family. Because in America, you're kind of like, initially kind of like pushed out to kind of like go do your own thing, start your own family. But yeah, so it's been really nice. It's been, I think some people are probably like, oh, is it weird to like stay with your in-laws so often? And like, I'm like, no, they're great. They, you know, they like to cook me food. We have the same sense of humor. Like, there's zero kind of like resentment or judgment that we're there eating their food and, you know, using their electricity. Like, it's been, you know, refreshing.
There is a kind of the movement in the US now that actually people go back to live with their parents.
Totally.
I think that's it's also connected to the economy. When the economy
100%.
was doing great, it kind of makes sense. If you can make more money, justify this by like living alone. If you can move to another place where you'll be making more money and it will be enough for you to make a living out of it and to rent a place, then it kind of makes sense. But in Philippines, because the population is like not so, the majority of people not so wealthy, yeah, and people have to, they just cannot go, let's say, from some small village to Manila. It's not feasible. I think
Totally. I mean, I remember when, you know, part of the reason my wife decided to move to Singapore was the job that, you know, the degree that she got, the job that she got, like salary-wise, couldn't, you know, afford her the ability to go and do the things that she'd like to do, like travel the world and do other stuff. You know, that's why she moved to Singapore, where she could earn more and then travel more. So I do think slowly the Philippine economy is like maybe the middle class, and there are more jobs that allow for that. But yeah, I mean, I think part of it is out of necessity. You know, it's the salaries here don't necessarily allow for people in the entry level area to even think about moving out and getting their own place. You know, like, I mean, I'm sure there are jobs that allow for that in certain industries, but the typical job, you know, it's not gonna be easy for you unless you've already had a lot of savings, or you just somehow find a super cheap place, you know, which is not necessarily easy to do. But yeah, I would say that would be the biggest difference between America and Philippine culture. Is I just feel like, I think I'm also really lucky that my wife's family is so hospitable, and although we're not like super wealthy, they're also, you know, doing pretty well enough to where it's not, you know, there's not like this like pressure to have to like, you know, help support or like pay rent or do these other things.
Yeah.
But I also know that that's, you know, I'd be naive to think that that's not the, you know, that's common throughout the Philippines.
What's the best way to make friends with locals? Let's say you come for lunch. Like in Singapore, the big part of the culture and like of the conversations is the food. So people love to talk about food. Like Singaporeans, my Singaporean friends, they like, we come to the spike ball game and then they start talking about, okay, where we go for lunch after it's like the big part of like.
Totally.
Yeah, what's the topics to discuss here?
I would say it's similar here. Filipinos definitely love to eat and like essentially, you know, just kind of like gather as a friend group. What I've noticed is that there are really big communities of like, let's say like cyclists or people who play basketball or different like, you know, sports. I would say if you did move here and you have an interest in playing, you know, maybe one of the more popular sports, I don't think it'd be that hard to find a group of people, maybe a league or something.
Yeah.
So that would be pretty easy, but you know, maybe it's because I don't really look too intimidating. I haven't had much trouble even when I'm traveling alone or out by myself in the Philippines. Like, people just sometimes come up and say, oh, where are you from? Or they want to talk to you. So I haven't had much trouble, but I also understand maybe it's just, you know, maybe the older you are, the harder that might be, because the older you get, I think the less likely people maybe want to come up and bother you or something.
Yeah, I already noticed like people are very responsive here.
Yeah.
They're kind of not shy to talk.
Yeah, definitely.
Because in some parts of Asia, people are more like, they don't want to disturb you. They're like maybe more shy, more reserved. But feels like people can be shy maybe, but they're still like open.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain.
No, totally. I would say that's one of the best things about the Philippines is that even if I didn't know any Tagalog, most people have a pretty decent grasp on English. So anyone, even if it's like your second language with English, if you can kind of have basic conversations, people are going to be wanting to have them with you. I feel really blessed that, you know, my native language happens to be, you know, a very popular, you know, common language spoken here, because that makes it a lot easier, you know. I would say that there are some people here in the Philippines who, it's kind of common for like Filipinos to maybe make fun of each other if they speak bad English. Like it's just like they kind of pick on each other if like, you know, they mispronounce words or whatever, which sometimes makes people a little intimidated to speak English to you in like bigger groups of friends. But just like a random person on the street, I feel like it's not that hard for them, at least in Manila, to, you know, for you to strike up a conversation with, and yeah, it's not that bad.
What was the most shocking thing or unusual thing for you when you first started like coming to the Philippines?
I knew the traffic would be kind of crazy, but it was pretty intimidating learning how to drive. Well, not learning, but starting to drive here.
Yeah.
I feel like now it's like second nature for me, but just in general, I think the density of the amount of people is probably the biggest thing. I really love the food, but some of the food was kind of initially a little bit different getting used to, just, you know, from American cuisine.
What's your favorite food?
I'm fortunate that my wife's family cooks a lot of really good Filipino food. I feel like my favorite dish is something called Bicol Express, which isn't as common here, but like adobo, liempo, lumpia, those are kind of the key staple things that I feel like you can find throughout most of the Philippines. It's really good.
I'm a big fan of adobo.
Yeah.
We have the helper, our domestic helper, she's from Philippines. She's the part of the family. She's been with us for like more than 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Raised our kids to some extent. She's like lovely, we love her. She, from time to time, she cooks like Filipino food, adobo. That what I think that was the first dish that I tried when she like joined us.
Yeah. I mean, that one is always a staple in our house, and it's like kind of a great go-to dish. Another one, the first time I ever had Filipino food was when I was in Singapore with my wife, and down in the Makansutra area, down by Manila Bay. She took me to like a Filipino place, and we had something called sisig, and that is a super delicious dish that I feel like is, you know, kind of a go-to snack for everyone here too.
Yeah. How would you compare life, let's say in Detroit versus life in Manila?
Specifically in this area, you could go throughout your day, and other than the fact of just seeing, you know, majority like Filipino people, like live a day that feels similar to Detroit, just because a lot of the same restaurants, you know, the language is like very, you know, like it's not hard, there's not really a barrier there. I would say that the biggest thing is when you leave the city, it starts to become very apparent that you're no longer, that you're in a different country.
Yeah.
But I would say typically, you know, whether it's, you know, going to see a movie, going to get coffee, going to like, you know, get some food, it feels pretty similar. I would say almost more convenient than in Detroit, because there's really not a lot of public transportation there, and you got to drive everywhere, so it's not too different from here. But once you go out into the province, very, very different. You know, which I like it because I like moving to a new country. I like it feeling like I'm in a new place, where here it feels really familiar, which isn't bad, but also, you know, I feel like I like to push myself to, you know, experience new things, where this, you know, is very comfortable here in the city.
Yeah.
One of the other reasons we decided to spend more time in the Philippines is, you know, we started to get burnt out. We were working like 40, 50 hours a week. Where we live in Michigan, for like 4 or 5 months out of the year, it's super cold. And so we just really started to like not really enjoy our jobs and enjoy our lives as much. And we were always looking for that next vacation.
Yeah.
And ever since we've came over here, I've been able to, you know, maybe work a little bit less, only work on the projects I want to work on, and so it's been helpful for that, just to be able to like be less stressed. Because even if you have a pretty good salary in America, it's really expensive to live there, especially with inflation recently. So it's not an easy place to live unless you work really hard.
And your wife, she prefers to live here or in the US?
She really enjoyed living in America for like the 4 years that we were there, and there's aspects of it that she really loves. I think it was the cold weather that was really hard for her to deal with, which I also don't like. So that was a big factor in why we decided to spend more time in the Philippines. I mean, have you experienced like winters that often, or is that a part of, I guess, you know, where you grew up?
For me, I hate winter.
Yeah.
I mean, I still remember my childhood memories when I waiting for the bus to go to the school, and like I'm being like frozen to death. I just, I don't want to have it. Or like when you already grew up, I used to live in Moscow, You need to go like 7 a.m. or 7 a.m. in the morning. It's still dark, like complete darkness. You go to the like ground level. So we live in the buildings, like high-rise buildings. So it's your car, like completely covered with the snow.
Yeah.
You need to spend like half an hour shuffling off the snow of your car, and then you go. I was like, oh, I don't want to experience that anymore.
Yeah, no, we can relate. I mean, for a couple months a year in Detroit, it's extremely cold, and I think the idea for most Filipinos to like experience winter and like go out into the snow, like initially there's this excitement because it doesn't exist here. But then maybe after like a couple weeks to a month, you're like, oh my gosh, I actually have to like scrape ice off my windshield every day or put on multiple layers of clothing. So, but no, it was definitely really exciting for her in America, and we did a lot of traveling, and it could be somewhere that later in life makes more sense to spend more time. But yeah, we really enjoy it for the time being in the Philippines.
People always say, okay, digital is so cool to be like digital nomad. You can live in a cheaper place, like work from anywhere, like work from the beach, which is actually doesn't make any sense from the beach. That is like super bright. There's no power like supply and the good Wi-Fi. But what's the gray size? People know the gray size about being digital nomad. What's the like a dark side of being digital nomad?
There's just sometimes that it's really hard to get internet, even in like a pretty populated area. So, like my wife and I, we have SIM cards, like cell phone plans with the two different providers in the Philippines, so Globe and Smart. So in case the Wi-Fi goes out at a hotel, we can, have two different cell phone providers to try to like, hotspot off of. But yeah, I would say the hardest part is that specifically in my business, I do a lot of work on like websites and a lot of, I just have to be more connected to the internet than maybe I would like to be. I mean, it's just part of being a digital nomad. But yeah, I would say sometimes it's just like, there's been times that I'm literally just walking around with my cell phone to find like 1 bar of signal to be able to respond to that email because someone's,
Even like in the city center.
City center, not so bad, but sometimes, even in the neighborhood that we live in, which is like a suburb that's very modern, there's like just sometimes little areas where like my cell phone gets like not that good a signal. I don't know if it's all the concrete or what it is, but yeah, that's one thing, but that's not uncommon for lots of parts of the world. I would say the hardest part really is if you're not really good with your time management and also kind of setting some barriers for yourself, because like for me, I don't mind, I'm kind of a night owl, so like I don't mind that, my colleagues are emailing me at 9 a.m. their time, which is 9 p.m. my time. But it almost feels like you're always working because you'll work during the day when they're sleeping, but then you get all these emails and people responding to you when they're working. So you got to have a kind of like a healthy barrier of when you're going to stop working, but also it's just part of it. If you're working, for international clients and you're 12 hours away time difference, you got to, maybe be okay with that.
Let's say Portugal. It's a great place to live. So many foreigners there. Apartments or houses are pretty cheap there. So you can, let's say, settle somewhere in the coast, live in a nice place, not spending much. But then I think the reality is, because I lived in many places in the world, like travel a lot. So I think you start become lonely at some point.
Yeah.
Because there is a huge impact on your like mental health and on your quality of your life. It's like your social circle, like people, like how you make friends, what people you meet on a week basis or like monthly basis. How's it here? So we briefly talk about like most of your friends, they're like from your wife's side.
Yep.
So can you talk about this? Like, let's say, what's the percentage, I don't know, of your friends, they're locals? What's the percentage of like other foreigners?
I want to make a little bit more of an effort to, I guess, go outside of the current circle of friends that we have. But I'm really lucky that all my wife's friends and family, one benefit I think of in general Philippine culture is that they're very welcoming, warm people. And so for me, it hasn't been hard to, like all my wife's friends, we have very similar sense of humor. We like to go and do the same things. We like to go, whether it's like camping or go to the beach or go out and just, have lunch somewhere. So I'm lucky that I'm already kind of like grandfathered into this really good friend group. But
Yeah.
back in America, I mean, I definitely was a very social person. I would like to go on bike rides and like play sports and do other stuff. So now that we've been here for a couple years, I feel like it's like a good time for me to maybe expand my like friend group. But yeah, the things that you mentioned, I think would be 100% like valid for a lot of people who maybe, don't have a really supportive like family or friend group or something. Because the first time I ever traveled through Asia, I came here with a friend and we traveled for about a month together. It was through Thailand and Cambodia. And it was us two, and we would stay and at hostels and meet all these travelers, and we loved that. The second time I came to Asia, I traveled for 6 months alone, like just working remotely and doing the digital nomad thing and traveling through a lot of countries. And there were times that I felt like, I wouldn't say I felt alone, but there were times when, you'd want to experience something with someone else, and maybe with someone who understands your humor, who you are a little bit more. So yeah, I totally agree that it can become lonely if you don't really find a good set of people, whether they're locals or expats or people that understand you for sure.
What would be your advice to your fellow Americans who are kind of considering coming to the Philippines to get the most out of it?
Anyone who is intimidated about traveling to Southeast Asia, excluding Singapore, because I just feel like that's such an easy international place to go to. So not counting Singapore, I would say the Philippines is the easiest to land and not have that same kind of culture shock that could happen elsewhere. The first place I went to was Bangkok with my friend, and it felt, people couldn't really speak English that well.
Yeah.
The hustle and bustle of like landing in Bangkok just felt so different than what we were used to. So there was this a little bit of like, although we were excited about it, like a culture shock, where I feel like you can land in the Philippines, someone will greet you in English, you'll see English on the sign, and although it'll feel different, it won't feel like intimidating. So for people who are interested in like kind of getting their feet wet to travel to Southeast Asia, it's really easy to start here. That's not to say that I didn't also find really great people in Thailand. I just feel like it was the language barrier definitely was there, and I just feel like there's just maybe something about the Philippines because of our, like for example, when I meet some older Filipinos, they know so much about World War II, and they know in some instances more about that period of history than I do. And so they'll talk to me about General MacArthur, who's this like figure that helped them through World War II and the occupation with Japan. And so I find it really great that like there's maybe, even though I don't think America's been the best partner for the Philippines in like overall prosperity wise, they have been a partner in some fashion that I think some local people, specifically like older adults, can like relate to. That I feel like it's refreshing that they're like excited to talk to me about the history of my country, and it's almost embarrassing that sometimes they know more about specific things than I do. In general, I was excited to experience something new when I came here. And so I don't kind of look at it as like, man, things are so different from where I came from, and I kind of embrace that things are different. And sometimes even something that might seem frustrating, like how long of a line might be, or the kind of bureaucracy of getting, like your driver's license renewed, whatever, like I've kind of dropped the expectation of what it was like for that in America, and I embrace that it's different here, because I feel like if you come here thinking, and you're always comparing it to where you came from, you're going to be disappointed. And it's just something that you're moving to a new country with different ways of doing things and different culture, and so you have to be very open-minded. I think I've just become a lot more patient of a person being here. Maybe it's because some of the stresses from living in America have dropped away, and like maybe because I have more free time, or because I have a little bit more disposable income because of the cost of living difference. But yeah, I would say you can't be, if you're coming here thinking that it's going to be like your previous country and you're going to complain about what's different, then it's not going to work out well for you.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's not a healthy way to come to another place and like start comparing, start complaining. I mean, it's human nature, I guess.
Totally.
I kind of can find myself also complaining about stuff, but then man, now appreciate what you have.
Yeah.
Like especially in Singapore, there are so many great things about Singapore, but also it's different. Things are different.
Yeah.
So be prepared that it's different. It's not like you used to have.
Totally. And I mean, I'm not saying, of course, my wife and I vent to each other if, you know, traffic sucks or someone, there's things that make my wife and I upset because we've lived outside of the Philippines. But I guess what I've seen, you know, like I'm, you know, recently become a little bit more active on some of the expat groups. And I see, you know, maybe a little bit more negativity than I would expect. I'm like, how did you moved to a new country? You didn't expect things to be a little different, you know? Like if you want things to be exactly the way that they were, you can't live in a new country, you know, like that's just, you know. But I would say overall, I've had really good experience with, I mean, I really can't think of a really negative experience with like local people here. Like everything is great. Sometimes there's like an asshole driver, but you know, America invented road rage. Like there's like, so it's like I can't, you know, there's terrible drivers in America. So outside of the random rude driver, I feel like it's been very warm and welcoming here. I guess being open-minded and excited to kind of embrace what's different about the Philippines rather than comparing to like what, you know, because there's going to be so many things that I think are better about the Philippines, but it can't be better at everything. There's going to be things that it's not as good about your previous country, and you can acknowledge it without maybe kind of like dwelling on it, you know?
Yeah.